Hi everyone, welcome back to Edureka, instructor-led online training portal. So in our today's session, we are going to talk about module 2, which is going to deal with Java basics and introduction to our Selenium WebDriver. So here we have set the objectives. So as we have seen in the last class, we know now what is Selenium IDE, what is Selenium WebDriver, and we also have seen what are the different components and also the evolution of Selenium. And we have understood why we use Selenium, how industry uses it, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of your Selenium. So when we were going through, we were talking about the Selenium's language bindings, which mean the Selenium supports multiple languages. So here, the language that we have taken into consideration for our session is our core Java. Right. So in order to work with your Selenium, your core Java language is mandatory. So which means a programming language is very much important if we are working with your Selenium. Right. So what we are going to do is in our today's class, we would understand the basics of your core Java. I mean, what are the important concepts that we have to know in order to work with your Selenium? And we will also understand a little more about your Selenium WebDriver. We will see how to open the browser, I mean to say how to launch the browser using your Selenium, and we will list out all the web elements that is present. We will know about the different browser drivers, and we will understand various element locators, and we will also understand the difference between your driver close and driver quit. So this is going to be our agenda for today's class. All right, so let's get started. So I will be taking you through the hands-on session with your basics, I mean Java basics. We are not going to take up any theoretical part. Okay, so let me directly go to my Eclipse. So we already know how to set up a project in our Eclipse, right? So how do we set up? We go to File, click on New, okay, and choose Project, and then go to Java project. So if it is not available here, we go to the Java folder and then choose the Java project from there. So here I would be naming it as Java, and then click on Next and click Finish. So as soon as I create a project, here I would be getting two libraries, I mean to say two folders. One is your source folder and the second one is your JRE system library. So this system library is the one which comes along with your project, which means this is taken up by your Java software itself. So we are not going to make any changes on your JRE system library, because these are the resource files that has been taken up by your project. Okay, so now there is another folder called as source, which actually is a collection of multiple packages. So what do we mean by packages? Packages in Java are nothing but a collection of similar type of files, right? So here it is similar type of Java files. So your package can be termed as a folder. For example, say if you create a folder by name personal, you will store all the personal documents in that folder, right? Likewise, your package is just a folder which will hold a similar type of class. All right, so now in order to create a package, we right click on your source folder, go to new and select this package, right? So here we give the name to the package. So I'm going to give it as basic. All right, so just I'll use the industry standard way of creating the name. So we use the reverse URL of it, com.edureka.basic, right? So this com is the domain name, Edureka is the name of the organization, and basic is the folder name or the package name that we are going to give, right? Click on finish. So now you can start adding all your classes and your whatever say Java programs inside this basic folder. All right, so now what we are going to do is we are going to create multiple classes based on the concepts that we cover. All right, so in your Java, what is Java? Java is a object oriented programming language, and we also call it as a platform. So why do we call it as an object oriented programming language? Because Java deals only with objects. So now what do you mean by object? An object is a real world entity which has an attribute and its behavior, okay, so which has its own attributes and behavior of its own. For example, say student, right? Student has its own attributes, correct, and it also has its own behavior. For the example, take chair, take table, take an employee, take a human being. So all these things are termed as object in terms of your Java. Any real-time entity which has attributes and also has behavior is known as an object. And in order to talk about this object, in order to store the attributes of an object and also the behavior of an object, we need an entity which holds all of this, right? So an entity which is a blueprint of object, an entity which talks about the attributes and behavior of an object is known as a class. So your Java is all about classes and object, right? So now, how do we create a class? For example, say my object now is a chair. Okay. So what do? We are going to create a class. We are going to understand what are the different attributes of that chair is, that object is, and what are the behavior of that object is. For example, say you're talking about a student, right? So what all attributes will a student hold? A student can hold its ID, right? A student will have his roll number. The student will have his course details, his percentage, his college name. So all these things becomes your attributes, right? So the behavior are the methods that we are going to create, wherein we might have to display the value of the display the ID of the employee. Student, right? I might have to display the name of the student. I might have to set a name to a student. So all these things becomes the behavior. All right. So now we'll see how to create an object and how to keep all these attributes inside the entity called as class. So let us create a class. Right click on your package, go to new, click on class. So here the class name that I'm going to give is student. Okay. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to click on finish. Here I start storing the attributes of a student in a class. So what are the attributes that we discussed? We say int roll number, right? We say string name. We also take the college name, right? I just make it as college. So these are the attributes that I have captured. So now what are the behavior that I can use? I can use something called as a method or a constructor in order to add value to the all this, or I can also have the method or a function which will display the value of all, right? So now what we are going to do, we are going to use a constructor, okay, in order to initialize all this. So now we have to understand important points here. So all the variables, so these are called as variables, right? So how do we create variables? What are variables? Variables are the name given to a memory location, and the variables can hold values which can change based on the user requirement. All right. So how do we create a variable? We provide the data type and we provide a variable name. So this is how we declare a variable. So this is known as declaration. Okay. Declaration of variables. And this type of variables which belong to a class. All right. So which belong to a class and they belong to an object. Okay. So all right. Let me put it across in this way. Any variable which are declared outside a method and inside a class and they belong to an object are known as instance variables. So these are basically known as instance variables. Very important word to keep in mind. Okay. So what do you mean by a constructor? Why do you use constructor? Constructor is a special member of a class which is used to initialize the instance variables. Alright. So this is important. A constructor is a special member of a class which is used to initialize instance variables. So how do we create a constructor? There are two important things that you'll have to know about your constructor. One is there is a default constructor, which means a constructor which is provided by your JVM. Okay, for example, say I have not provided any constructor. Okay, I'll go to your name, I'll go to your main method. In order to access the instance variables of any class, it is important for us to create an object. So this is a direct way of accessing the methods. So what I'm going to do, so I create an object. Student S is equal to new student. Okay, so this is how we instantiate an object. So the object creation in Java is known as instantiation. Okay, so this is how you create an object. Do you see this new keyword which is used and also a method call which is used, right? A student with the parenthesis is known as a call. Okay, Okay, so what is the use of this new keyword and what does this student refer to? So this new keyword is an operator. We call it as a new operator, which will allocate memory in the heap region for the object created for any particular class. For example, here we are going to create the class name, student, object of type student, which is S. The object name is S. So now what it does, this new operator will create a memory location or will allocate a memory location for this S object, okay, in the heap memory. Alright, and what is this called as? So this is a constructor which is used in order to create the object. So now my question is, have I used any constructor in my class? No, right? So now where did this constructor come from? How is this constructor able to create an object? This is the concept of a default constructor. Okay, there is a constructor called as default constructor which will be provided by your JVM implicitly. What is JVM? JVM is a Java virtual machine which is not actually available or present physically, but it is a virtual machine which is running in order to execute your program. Okay, so this JVM will provide a constructor implicitly when there is no user defined constructor specified. So what does this constructor do? This constructor is going to initialize all these instance member to its default value. Alright, for example, say if it is integer, every data type for that matter will have its default value, right? If it is integer, then the default value is 0. If it is a string, then the default value is null, right? So that is how it is going to, your default constructor is going to initialize the instance variables to its default value. Got it? So this is the concept of your default constructor. Now, what is the other way of initializing? So I don't want the value to be default, but now I'm going to give the actual value. How do you access it? You use the object name dot operator and start accessing all your instance variables. Say I'm going to provide s dot roll number is equal to 1, s dot name is equal to something. So I'm going to give some name. Okay, I'm going to give it as Steve, and then I'm going to give the college name. So here the college name I'm going to choose is Oxford. Some name that you want to give. Alright, so this is how you're going to initialize values when you have a object create. Alright, and how do you display? I'm going to display it like this. SYSO, and then I use s dot roll number. I'm sorry, it should not be in your double quotes. Okay, so s dot roll number. All right, and now I'm going to print s dot name, right? And then I'm going to print s dot what it is, college. Correct? So this is how we are going to print it. Now if I run this program, it is going to print the new values that you have given to your object. So this is how you're going to work with. Alright. So you can see if you don't initialize these variables, then it is going to initialize it to the default values. If you want, you can see here. Can you see this? The default value of int is 0 and the string is null. So this is how your default constructor is going to initialize the instance variables to its default values. Got it? So now my point is, if I have to create the database, or if I have to create details for at least 50 members in a class, right? So let us not talk about in terms of college. Let us talk about in terms of code. Okay, so think I'm building a student module. Of course I'm building a student module for the entire class, but my job here is to build the student module for only say people who are working in engineering or who are studying in engineering. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I have to take the number of students that are present and I have to give them values. So do you think it is easy for you guys to initialize the values individually like this? Okay, now if I have to create another object, what do? I create a new object, s1 is equal to new student, right? So this is how I create another object. So now using this s1, I have to start initializing the value. Say student roll number is equal to 2, s1 dot name is equal to say George, Okay, and then I say s1 dot college is equal to Oxford, the same college but the next student, right? So this is how we are going to build it. If I have to print the details of the student, what am I supposed to do? I am supposed to print the values pertaining to that object. I say s1 dot roll number, s1 dot name, and s1 dot college, right? So this is what I'm going to do. Now if I print this, you will be able to see two student information, right? Do you think it is feasible for us to enter or to initialize all the students' details one by one individually like this, which will have at least, just to add two student details, I have used almost more than 3, 6, 7, 14 lines. Okay, do you think it is so easy for just to construct the variables or just to construct the instance variables for at least 50 students? So one student, it is going to take 7 lines. For 50 students, it is going to take 350 lines. Just think about the number of students in a college and think what is the number of lines your program would take just to capture the details of the employee and put across the details of the, capture the details of your student and put across the details of your student, right? It is huge. So then what we do is we are going to work with your constructors. Now comes the concept of your user-defined constructor, or you can also call it as parameterized constructor. So again, in user-defined constructor, there are two different constructors. I'll tell you what are they. So what do you mean by a user-defined constructor? A user-defined constructor is a constructor which is defined explicitly. So this is what we are going to do. All right. So now if you create this, okay, if you create this, I'm going to keep the values here and I'm going to print it. So here is what I'm going to do. S.name and roll number and s.college. Okay. So now I don't have to use that. Let me remove. Okay, so now if I run this code, what it is going to do, it is going to print the details of the student perfectly. The second thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create another object. Okay, here I'm going to create another object and I'm going to print the details of the student, right? I'm going to print the details of the student. So now if I do this, what actually happens is it is going to consider the same value any number of time you create an object. Why? Because the values in your constructor are hard-coded. So this is the reason we don't go with a constructor like this. So this constructor is basically known as a no argument constructor, which means this constructor will not take any arguments or parameters, but instead it is used to initialize the variables to either its default values or to a values which are which will never change. So likewise the hard-coded value. So this is again not feasible for us. So what we are going to do is we are going to create another constructor which is known as parameterized constructor. So a parameterized constructor is a constructor which will take number of parameters in order to initialize its instance variables. So how do we create a parameterized constructor? We are going to pass the parameters within this constructor header. Okay, so I say int r, right, string name and then string college. All right, so this is how I'm going to use the parameters in order to construct it. So here I say roll number is equal to r, name is equal to n, and college is equal to Oxford, right? College is equal to Oxford. So this is how we create a parameterized constructor. So as soon as you create a parameterized constructor, you can see the errors which are thrown here. Why is it throwing an error? It is because there is no such signature of a constructor in your program. So now my question is, as I told you already, so there is a default constructor which will be provided by a JVM in case we don't have any constructor, right? So then why do this error come up? Which means when you have a explicitly defined constructor in your program, your JVM will not allow you to or will not provide any default constructor, but instead you will have to use the constructor that you have defined. So for this, what we are going to do, we are going to change the signature of your constructor like this. So I pass the value here. One is the roll number and Steve is the name and then Oxford is the college. correct? Oxford is the college. So now the error got resolved, correct? Again here I'm going to do the same. I'm going to give 2 as your name, and then Philip is the 2 is the roll number, Philip is the name, and then Oxford is the college, correct? So this is what I'm going to do. If now I run this code, then it is going to give you multiple values based on your initialization, right? So this is how we use your constructors in order to work with your objects, all right, in order to initialize the instance variables of a object, all right? So what did we understand? We understood what are the different types of constructor. There are 2 types of constructors. One is your default constructor, the second one is your user defined constructor. So your default constructor is a constructor which is provided by your JVM when there is no user defined constructor provided. So it will provide a default constructor which will initialize the instance variables to its default value, all right? So the second one is your user defined constructor. So this user defined constructor has again 2 types. One is your no argument constructor, which does not take any arguments, but instead it is used in order to create an object and assign or initialize the objects to its default values. And the second one is the parameterized constructor. So this parameterized constructor is going to take parameters which will initialize the object to its user provided value. Got it? So this is about your constructor. Another important point you'll have to understand about the constructor is your constructor is not going to take any return type, okay? So and the constructor name should always be similar to your constructor, the class name and the constructor name should always be same, okay? There should not be any difference, and you can have any number of constructor in a class. So like this, I am going to create a constructor which will construct only 2 values, okay? So here I'm going to say roll number is equal to R and name is equal to N. I'll mark it as N now. Okay, I'll just mark it as N. So likewise, your constructor can be multiple. Based on the signature, you can overload your constructor. So this concept is known as constructor overloading, which means having the same name and performing the multiple tasks. This is known as your constructor overloading. So how can you overload a constructor? You can overload a constructor based on the number of parameters it takes, okay, the type of parameters it takes, and also the sequence of parameters it takes. For example, say I have here 3 parameters, okay. So what I'm going to do is I'll try to create a constructor with the same signature. So as soon as you try, there is an error shown in 2 places. So if you just mouse over, it says duplicate method student. So this is already present. So if I just change the sequence of this variable, then you would still be able to create it. Can you see this? So this is known as your constructor overloading. So along with this, you can also have a constructor which is a no parameter constructor in order to create an object. Now if you create an object like this, student S2 is equal to new student, then it is again valid. So what is this student going to do? This is going to initialize the instance variable to its default values. So likewise, your constructors can be overloaded with the different signature. Alright, so this is about your constructor. Now, though I have reduced the number of lines, right? I have reduced the number of lines here to 4. Am I right? So I have reduced it to 4. But still, this is kind of overloading. Am I right? This is kind of overloading. Why is it overloading? Because every time I create an object, I have to, print this roll number, name and college every time. So I don't want to do this, but instead what I want is, as soon as I create an object, I should be able to print this message using only one statement. So how do I do? How do I minimize the number of lines of code that I have? So here I have a special method, okay. I can create methods using which you can reduce the number of lines that you can use or you can give in order to print these details. So how do I create? I am going to create a method called as display. So this is how your method looks like. So this is the return type of a method and this is the name of the method. So what you're going to do is you're going to cut this. Okay, just place it here. Do not use any objects. Your object is not required at all. Okay, here I'm going to print the instance variables directly. Okay, so now if you want to print the values of this student, then all you have to do is using this student object, you're going to call that method. So let me call this method display. Alright, so if you do that, there's no need for you to write this print statement every time you create an object. All you can do is create an object, call this method with that particular object, which will help you to print the details of that particular object. So this is what I'm going to do. So let me run this code. I will make it as S2. So let me run this code and see how my output would look. Can you see here? 1 Steve and Oxford, 2 Philip and Oxford, and 0 null null, because I have used your default constructor, your no argument constructor, which is also used to initialize the objects to its default values. So that is the reason it is providing you this. So if you want, you can use the second constructor or the third constructor wherein you initialize the instance variables. For example, say I'm going to give 3 and I'm going to use some value like John. Okay, now I have created an object using this constructor, right? So likewise, you can start working with your constructors based on its signature. All right, can you see this? So this is how it is going to work. Alright, so this is about your constructors and methods. So in methods, we are supposed to discuss about multiple things. So there are basically 4 different types of methods. So when you see this signature, okay, what is this? This is return type and this is the method name, okay? And here, this represents the parameter list. If you want to give parameters, you can give parameters. If you don't want to give parameters, you don't have to specify anything. So basically, your methods are of 4 different types. So just make a note. One is a method with return type and with parameter, a method without return type and without parameter, a method with return type and without parameter, and also methods without return type and without parameter. So these are the 4 methods. So here I would create another class and I'll show you the methods demo. Alright, so let me mark this as methods demo. Alright, so let me create the multiple methods. So here, how do we create methods with all the different signatures? Here I say the first one is method without return type and without parameters. So when you don't have any return type, it is referred to as void because void means nothing. Alright, so here, for example, I use this void addition. Okay, so this is a method that I'm going to take. Okay, so what type of method is it? This method is nothing but without return type and without parameter. Alright, so here what you're going to do, you're going to take this int a is equal to 10. Alright, then int b is equal to 20 and then I'm going to print this. Okay, what I'm going to print? I'm going to print a plus b. Alright, so this is what I'm going to do. The second thing is, now what is the drawback of this? Again, the values are hard-coded. Am I right? So any number of times you run this method, it is going to provide you the same result with this 30. So now I want to perform the addition operation on multiple values. In that case, what I'm going to do? I'm going to create a method with a different name. So here what I would be doing is I'm going to create a method, for example say add, and I'm going to give this int a comma int b. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to add these 2 variables, okay, a plus b. So now when I call for the first time, the values that I'm going to pass here are say 10 and 20, and for the next time I might pass a value 30 and 40, right? So likewise I can start creating methods with my own way. So I'll tell you how to work with this. So here methods demo m is equal to new methods demo. So here I'm going to call this m dot addition, right? So first m dot addition. So any number of times you call this addition, what is the output that you're going to get? You're going to get the same output, which is your 30. Am I right? So let me run this. Can you see any number of times I run, it is going to produce the same output. So now using this object, I'm going to call the method add, wherein for the first time I'm going to pass a different value, and also the second time I'm going to pass a different value, right? So here I say 40 and here I'm going to say 30. So likewise I can give, so I make it as 20. Alright, so now if I run this, I can run my output, or I can execute the output based on different set of input. So this is nothing but method without return type and with parameter. So method without return type and with parameter. Alright, so this is how we create. And the next one we are going to discuss about is method with return type and without parameter. For example, say the output of one program is to be used as an input to another program. For example, say the addition of two value is being used in order to multiply it with another value. In that case, what we are going to do, we are going to bring the output of that particular method and we are going to store it in a variable which will be used in our further processing. So in that case, we are going to go with your method with return type and with or without parameter list. It again depends on your requirement. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to say int, I'm going to call it as multiplication, or no, let me call it as addition. Okay, so addition 1, I'm going to name it as addition 1. So here what I'm going to do, I'm going to take, so add return statement. Okay, I'm going to take the same code and I'm going to paste it here. But the important thing is, when you have a return type as a data type, okay, so this can take string as data type, this can take your int, your double, your float, your long, or whatever data type is present, all the data types, your methods can also return an object. That is also possible. Okay, so in that case here, it is important for you to use your return statement. So what you're going to return? You're going to return a plus b. Alright, so now if I have to use this addition statement, or if I have to use this addition method in my program, what am I supposed to do in order to capture the output? I have to create a variable of type this return type. So here I'm going to say int sum is equal to m.addition, and now you can start printing this value. System.out.println, I'm going to print this sum. So if I run this, okay, let me comment these lines for your understanding. Okay, now when I run this, it is going to print what? It is going to print 30, which means the sum of the two values, right? Again, any number of times you use this, it is the same problem. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to parameterize this, right, wherein I'm going to use this int a and b as parameters, and then I'm going to perform the operation so that every time I use this, I can give a different set of values and I can get a different output. Again, I would use the same sum variable in order to call this method addition 1, wherein I'm going to pass 6 and 4. Right, again print this sum, it is going to print a value, right? So this is how you would be working with the different concepts of your Java, right? So this is about your methods and your constructor and also classes and your objects. So these are the important things that you should know, along with which there are multiple object oriented programming concepts that we are going to discuss about. So what are the different object oriented programming concepts? See, what do you mean by object oriented programming? The object oriented programming is something which you always deal with object, right? So these OOP concept, we call it as OOP. Let me refer to this as OOPs every time. We shouldn't be using that big statement, object oriented programming system. Let us short form it. Let us cut it short. Let us call it as OOPs. Okay, so has 4 concepts mainly. What are they? One is your inheritance, the second one is your abstraction, the third one is your polymorphism, and the fourth one is your encapsulation. So now we are going to deal with all these 4 concepts and will understand why do we use this and how do we implement this in your Selenium will be seen in the further classes. Okay, so the first concept that we are going to deal with is your inheritance. So let me create a package for your inheritance. So here I go create a new package. Okay, so I'll call it as inheritance. Okay, so what do you mean by inheritance? Inheritance is nothing but when one object acquires the properties of another object, we term it as inheritance. Okay, I'll tell you how we do it. Okay, let me create a class. I call it as simple inheritance. Okay, now, for example, say you have your father and your mother, right? So let us talk about the hierarchy. So how did we come? We came from our parent, correct? How did they come? They came from their parents, right? So likewise, inheritance is nothing but we acquiring the properties of our parents. So one or the other property of our parent we would have got it from your genetic, right? So that is how your inheritance would work. Okay, for example, say I might have got the color of my eyeball from my mom, right? The shape of my nose from my dad. So likewise, getting one object acquiring the properties of another object we term it as inheritance. So there are basically 5 different types of inheritance. What it is? One is simple inheritance, the second one is multi-level inheritance, the third one is hierarchical inheritance, the fourth one is multiple inheritance, and the fifth one is hybrid inheritance. So we are going to discuss about each and every concept one by one. Okay, so here the first one that we are going to talk about is your simple inheritance. So what do you mean by a simple inheritance? Here you'll have to understand two main terminologies. One is a superclass or a parent class, and the second one is your derived class or subclass or your child class. Okay, so these are the two terminologies that you know. Now our parents are known as the parent class. Let us take an example of your father. Okay, so our father is our parent class and we are subclass. Okay, so that is how we are going to relate. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a class called father. Okay, and here I'm going to create a class called child. Okay, so this is what I'm going to do. So better understanding will be provided. Okay, so now what we are going to do is we are going to keep some attributes on each of the classes. I say int, what to say, I am going to take the string name, okay, and int age. These are the two attributes. Now in your child, okay, I'm going to take this as father name and father age. So I'll just make it as fh. Okay, so even in your child, I'm going to take it as child name and child age. Okay, so now they have no relationship between each other. So they both are independent. So how do we link them? How do we use your inheritance concept is your child should become a subclass. So in order to do that, you're going to use a keyword called as extend, right? So this extends keyword is going to provide an implementation in such a way that whatever is present in the superclass, okay, whatever class you're extending becomes your superclass or your parent class, and the class which is extending will become your child class or your subclass. Now your child class will have the properties of both its own and also the properties of its superclass. So if I create an object of type child, okay, see child C is equal to new child. So if you create an object of type child, then you would be able to access all the attributes of the child class along with its parent class. Can you see this? It has its father name is equal to, I'll give some value, okay, C dot father age is equal to some value. Alright, this has to be some value directly. So I'll give the value like 53. Okay, and then I'm going to take C dot child name. So here I'm going to give some value, and then what I do, I give C dot C age, which is your child age. So I'm going to give it as 25 or whatever. Okay, whatever value you want to give. Okay, so here I'm going to name this as father and I'm going to name it as child. Right, so this is how we would achieve your simple inheritance. Alright, but one important point that you'll have to keep in mind is your child would know what are the properties of its father, but this father class will have no idea about the subclass, which means a class which has extended it. So if you create a class of type father f is equal to new father. If you create an object of type father, then the father object will be able to access only its variables like your father name and your age, right? This is f. 53. Alright, got the concept of your inheritance? Your inheritance is one object acquiring the properties of another object, and the class which is being extended is known as the parent class, or you can also term it as the superclass, or you can also term it as a base class. And the class which is extending another class is known as your subclass or your child class or your derived class. Likewise, okay? And then the child class will acquire the properties of all its superclass as well, and it will have the properties of its own as well, wherein the superclass will have the properties of only its own, right? So it will have no idea about a class which has extended it. All right, so this is about your simple inheritance, wherein we talk about one superclass and one subclass concept. Okay, so the second type of inheritance that we are going to talk about is multi-level inheritance. So I'll show you this multi-level inheritance. All right, so what do you mean by multi-level inheritance? Multi-level inheritance will have multiple levels, right? So now we are going to start from your grandparents, or we'll consider your grandfather. So I'm going to create the class in the same way. So I say class grandfather, all right, and then I create a class called father, and then I'm going to create a class called child, right? So this is how your multi-level inheritance works. So now this is the superclass. Okay, it is already there, so I'll just mark it as 1 1. So now it should work. Okay, so this is known as the superclass. All right, so this is known as derived class 1, and this is known as your derived class 2. So both of them are derived class. Both your father 1 and your child 1 are derived class, but the way it is going to provide you access to the attributes differ. So this will contain the attributes of both father 1 plus grandfather. So it will contain the attributes of both father 1 and grandfather, and this will contain the attributes of father 1, grandfather, and also the child, right? So it will contain child attributes, father 1 attributes, and also the grandfather attributes. But here this will contain the attributes of only grandfather. So this is how it is going to work. Let me mark this as attributes of only father, grandfather. So it is attributes of your grandfather and your father. So here it is attributes of your child, father 1 and grandfather all together. So if you create an object of the child, okay, so here I'm going to show you int gh, which is your grandfather age, and int fh, which is your father age, and then here int ch, which is the child's age. So if you create an object of type child1, right, so child1 c1 is equal to new child1. So if you do this, then your c1 will be capable of accessing ch, all right, and then if at all you give your extends keyword. I use this extends grandfather, all right. So here all you have to do is extends father, right? So that is what you're going to do. So now if you start creating, okay, c1.h variable declaration, variables declarators to complete local variable. Okay, I'll have to provide a value. Okay, so here I'm going to give it as 13, some value that you want, and c1.fh is equal to somewhere around 43. Okay, and c1.grandfather age is, where's that gh? Gh is here, so wherein it is somewhere around 64 or 63 or whatever, or 67 or whatever you want. So this is how you're going to access the variables based on the derived classes. All right, so and now let me create your father as well. So father 1 f1 is equal to new father 1. All right, so if you use your f1 object, then you can see only your fh, and it is 43, and gh, correct? So which is your 67. If you try to access this ch, okay, which is not available, even if you try to give that value, it is going to throw an error which says this is not resolved. Okay, the variable c cannot be resolved or is not a field. So if you want, you can create a field is what it says. So this is not accessible. Got it? So this is about your multi-level inheritance. So you can have any number of subclasses, okay? Any number of subclasses in the levels, okay? So even then it works, not only 3, okay? So the next type of inheritance that we are going to discuss about is your hierarchical inheritance. So what do you mean by hierarchical inheritance? So this okay, so this is nothing but one parent class, multiple subclass concept. Okay, so let me show you what it is. So in the real time, it is nothing but one father having multiple children. Okay, so what we do, we create a class called father. Okay, and then we create a class called daughter extends father, right? And then we again create a class called what it is? I'm sorry, a class called son extends father. All right, so this is how we are going to make it. So let me make it as 2 because it doesn't work. The father class is already there in the package, and that is the reason, right? So now if you see this example, what it is doing, your father has 2 child, correct? But each of the child is independent of its own, right? Independence from its from each other. So this daughter does not have any attribute from the son, or neither the son has any attributes from the father. So now what is the concept here? So this is basically your single inheritance provided in different ways, right? So when you take this father to and daughter relationship, it is a simple inheritance, and when you take this father to and your son relationship, it is again a simple inheritance. So this is about your hierarchical inheritance, wherein one parent class having multiple subclasses. Alright, so now if you create an object of type daughter, so let me take this age here. So int age, okay. Here I take int d age, which is the daughter's age, and here I'll be taking int s age, which will be the son's age. So now if you create an object of type daughter, so what will she be able to access? She'll be able to access her own attribute, right? And also the father's attribute. But the son's attribute is nowhere seen because they both are nowhere in relationship, right? So they don't share each other's attribute, right? They are independent. So that is how it is. Daughter d is equal to new daughter. So d dot, can you see this? Age, which is the father's age, I'm going to give it as 30, okay? And d dot d age, which is nothing but 5, right? So likewise, you can create the son class and access the father's attributes and the son's attribute together. All right, so this is about your hierarchical inheritance. So the next concept or the next inheritance that we'll have to discuss is nothing but your multiple inheritance. So this multiple inheritance is nothing but the one child class having 2 parent classes. Okay, so this is nothing but our mother, our father, and a child relationship. Okay, so I'll tell you a simple joke. So when we were discussing about this multiple inheritance, what actually happened is I just happened to ask people in the class, what do you mean by, how do you relate your multiple inheritance now in your real time? Okay, so one answer which I got was so funny. There was I don't remember the student's name, but that person said one child having multiple fathers. So this is what he actually said, and that is actually illegal, right? You cannot have that, and it is not supported also. Okay, so here the concept is one child having multiple parents, which means having a mother and father relationship. You can take it as, okay, so that can be an example. So but the problem here is in Java, multiple inheritance is not supported at class level. So I'll show you how. For example, say I'm going to create something like this, multiple inheritance. Okay, I wanted a main class as well, but yeah, main method here I give. So now I'm going to create a class called mother. Okay, and then I'm going to create a class called father. Okay, so I'll just name it as, I'll not give R, intentionally I'll not give it as R. Okay, so this is what I'm going to do. So now I'm going to create a child class child, okay, which will have, so think I'm going to take it as 2 or 3, child 3, which will extend both mother and father, right? So it is going to extend both mother and father. So this is how we distinguish, but this is not allowed because here, if you see this, it says syntax error or token expected. So this is not will. Okay, so a child in Java cannot have two parent classes. Okay, two parent classes. That word classes is important. So how do we achieve multiple inheritance in Java is our question. So this multiple inheritance is Java is supported by a special concept called as interface. So what is this interface? How do we create interface? And when do we go with interface is what we are going to see when we discuss the next concept. Okay, so I'm just going to mark it here, but I would comment this entire line. Okay, and I would say this is not allowed. Okay, so multiple inheritance in Java is not supported at class level. So this word is very much important. It is not allowed at class level. Okay, so people tend to get confused that multiple inheritance is not at all possible in Java. No, multiple inheritance is possible in Java, not at the class level but at the interface level. So that is what we are going to see now. And the last type of inheritance that we have to discuss is your hybrid inheritance. Your hybrid inheritance is nothing but the combination of two or more inheritance. For example, say I have this class mother, class father, and I would have a child like this. So I say class child 3 extends, or I just say daughter extends mother. Okay, and I'm going to say class son extends father. Okay, so here I have two simple inheritance. Okay, so likewise, and there is another one here, think son 1. Okay, and they have another son 2. Okay, who extends both father and mother, father comma mother, right? But which is not actually possible because here came another concept of your what, multiple inheritance. So this, when we work with your interface, we are going to understand how this deal with. Okay, but for now let us keep it like this. So what does this mean? This means daughter has the attributes of only the mother and the son 1 has the attribute of only the father, but son 2 share the attributes of both father and mother. So that is what it is. Okay, in the real time. All right, so this is about your inheritance. Okay, this is about your inheritance. What do you mean by inheritance? One class or one object acquiring the properties of another object is known as inheritance, and there are 5 different types of inheritance. One is simple inheritance, and we have multi-level inheritance, we have hierarchical inheritance, and also we have multiple inheritance, and the 5th one is your hybrid inheritance. So this hybrid inheritance is nothing but the combination of 2 or more types of inheritance. All right, so the next concept that we are going to discuss about is your abstraction. So what do you mean by abstraction? Why do we go with abstraction? What are the different ways of achieving abstraction is what we are going to see now. All right, so abstraction is a concept of, or abstraction is a process of hiding the implementation and showing only the functionality. So what we do in abstraction is we are going to hide the implementation and we will show how the functionality is. Okay, so when do we go with this abstraction? For example, say there are set of behavior that has to be provided to multiple classes or multiple objects. In that case, we are going to use your abstraction concept. So how do we achieve abstraction? There are 2 ways of achieving abstraction. One is using your abstract classes and the second one is using your interfaces. So what do you mean by an abstract class? An abstract class is partially an abstract body. Or what do you mean by abstract? An abstract is nothing but your incomplete, I'm sorry, it is incomplete, right? So when you make a class as incomplete, okay, so in that case you call it as an abstract class. So this abstract class will help you to achieve 0 to 100% abstraction. So I'll tell you what it is, how we can create class as abstract. So let me create package and I will name it as abstraction. Okay, so I would be using this com.abstraction. class.edureka.abstraction. So here I'm going to take a first class as abstract class. Okay, I'll name it as abstract demo. Alright, so this is what I'm going to do. So now what we are going to do is in your abstract class, okay, so this abstract class, as I told you, is an incomplete class. So how do you create an abstract class? You're going to make this as abstract. Alright, so if you use this keyword abstract, then that class is considered as an abstract class, which means incomplete class. So here the main method will be of no use. Okay, so this class is basically a blueprint which only contains the definitions of methods. Okay, so it will not have the complete implementation. So it can have different methods like abstract methods and also concrete methods. So abstract methods are nothing but the method which has only declaration. So we create the abstract methods using the abstract keyword. For example, say I use this void display. Okay, here I'm not going to give the body to it, but instead I'm going to just give a declaration wherein if my class, okay, if my any other class is going to implement this abstract class, then that subclass is going to provide the implementation, or it is going to provide the definition for this method. Okay, so that is how this method will get its implementation. So I told you abstract classes are used to achieve 0 to 100% implementation, right? So which means your abstract classes can contain display1, can't contain methods which have body as well. Okay, so let me use this. This is a concrete method. Okay, so likewise. Okay, so now how do we use this? How do we make use of this method which is present in your abstract class? Now I'm going to create, just give me 1 minute. So let me use this here. So class abstract, okay, or I'll just mark it as sample and I would place this here. So there is something, let me check what it is. The type sample must be an abstract. Okay, yeah, abstract class sample. So here I would be removing it. So I'm going to create this as an abstract class and show you how it works. Okay, so now I have another class called demo, okay, which extends your sample. Okay, so now as soon as you create this class which is extending the sample class, it will ask you to two quick workarounds. One, it has to either provide the implementation to this particular method that is present in the abstract class build, or even this class should be created as an abstract class. Okay, which means a subclass which is implementing or which is extending another superclass, okay, which is of type abstract. So I can tell it in this way: a subclass which is extending a abstract superclass must provide implementation to the abstract methods that is present in the class, in the superclass, failing which even that would become an abstract class. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to add the unimplemented method. Okay, so here I would be providing a body to this method. Okay, I'm just going to provide a body like this: abstract method implemented in subclass. Okay, so this is how you would be able to achieve your abstraction. Okay, so now in order to get this, for example, say not only this demo class needs this method. For example, there are multiple classes which might require a template in order to use. Okay, and the same template, if you keep creating everywhere, if you keep creating the methods everywhere, it is again a overload. But instead, why don't we create a template which will provide accessibility to multiple classes wherein it can implement the methods in its own way, right? So that is what is accessible, or that is what is achievable using your abstraction. Okay, now what we are going to do is we are going to create an object of type demo. Okay, demo d is equal to new demo, and now you would be able to access both the methods of the demo class which is implemented in the demo class, and also the method which is implemented in your your abstract class. So this needs to be done in main method. Let me take up a main method and then let me start accessing it. Okay, so I'll add it here. D dot, can you see this display? Display is also accessible. D dot display 1 is also accessible, correct? And one important thing that you'll have to know is you cannot instantiate your abstract class, which means an object of type abstract class cannot be created. Why? Because that class is incomplete. An object of type incomplete class is never created, right? So that is the reason we are not allowed to create this object of type abstract class. Can you see this? Here it shows an error which says cannot instantiate the type sample. Why? Because it is abstract. Okay, so here I'm going to comment this and provide the comment. Okay, so abstract class cannot be instantiated. Alright, so this is all about your abstract classes in your abstraction concept. The second way of achieving your abstraction is using your interfaces. So why do you use your interface? And what is an interface? Interface is a 100% abstract body which contains only abstract methods. So this is used in order to provide or in order to hide the implementation and provide the functionality to the other subclasses. So here it is going to hide all its implementation by making the methods as what? By making the methods as abstract, wherein the implementation classes can start implementing these methods and give the implementation in its own way, right? So let me create a new class and I'll tell you what is the concept. Okay, we'll relate it to the real time as well. Okay, here I'm not going to create a class. Here I'm going to create a interface. Okay, so I'm going to create an interface by name bank. Okay, and then I'm going to keep some method. I'm going to keep one method. Here I say void rate of interest. Okay, so this is the method that I have kept. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create other classes. Okay, creates, for example, say class state bank. Okay, so here I would take this main method. Okay, so now what I'm going to do here, I'm going to take this rate of interest for fixed account. Okay, and then void rate of interest for savings account. Okay, I take void what else I can take? Rate of interest for credit cards, right? And then I take void rate of interest for loan. Okay, likewise I'm going to take multiple methods. So what has this become? This has just become a template wherein I am going to write or I am going to implement this based on the different banks that I'm going to use. So be it if I take, for example, take I'm a state bank and I want to use your template. So what I do, I'm just going to implement this, okay, interface, and I would provide implementation to all the methods that is present in an interface by the way that I want. Okay, for example, say I'm going to say implements back. Okay, so now what it does, it is going to ask you to add all the unimplemented method. Okay, so this is what I'm going to do. I have added all the unimplemented methods. Now I'm going to provide the implementation based on my requirement. See, I would just write a statement here, SYSO. The rate of interest, or I just name it as ROI, okay, is for fixed, it is 6.7 per annum. Okay, for our example, I'll give you 9% per annum. Okay, 9% per annum. And here, what would be the rate of interest for your savings bank account? Savings bank account can be somewhere around 4%. Okay, so let me copy the same statement and start adding it. So here it can be only 4%. Okay, and here it can be for credit cards, it can be 13%. Okay, and for loans I would be giving you somewhere 11%. Okay, so this is for one bank. Now if I'm creating, okay, there's a override. So the method rate of interest savings of type state bank must override or implement a super type method. Yes, of course it is overriding. It is there, right? Let me save this. Yeah, remove override. Okay, the problem is with your override methods. So let me override this. Let me not add this. Okay, so this is what we have done. All right. So and the next one is, for example, say you being a person from your HDFC bank or say, for example, from ICICI bank, and you take this. Okay, here I'm going to create this Kotak bank. Okay, any bank for that matter. So you want to use my template. You're most welcome. All you have to do is just implements bank. Okay, so now all you have to do is add the unimplemented methods, implement them based on the way you want, and start using it. So that's all you're going to do. Alright, that's all you're going to do. So this is how you're going to work with your interfaces, and then you can give your own implementation. Alright, this is all about your interface. But here, so you have to talk about when you're talking about interfaces, all you have to consider is your interface can contain only the abstract methods. You cannot have any concrete methods in your interface. All right, and you have to make sure that all the methods in your interface is by default abstract. So you don't have to provide this abstract keyword. It is by default considered as abstract and public. Okay, the access specifier for your methods in the interface is by default public and abstract. So even if you provide or even if you don't provide, this would be the same. All right, and this is how it is. And your interface can act like a super class for the classes which is implementing this. Okay, so now let me show you how your interface can be used in order to create your multiple inheritance. Okay, let me show you. Okay, so now what we are going to do, let me create a new class, okay, which says account details. Okay, so here what I would be doing is I would be keeping all the account details in this particular class. Okay, I say long, or I'll take string account number. Okay, string customer name. All right, and then string customer address and long customer ID. So this is the details which I have. And also we have another interface called as bank, okay, which is being used in order to work with the rate of interest, correct? So now I'm going to create another class, okay, another class by name. For example, I'm going to create a class for a person, for a customer. Say the class is Steve Bank account. Okay, so now what are the important things that I need from this class? I want his account details, and I also want the rate of interest that will be levied for all the different types of accounts that he is going to open, correct? For that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to extend this account, extend his bank account with account details, and also I'm going to implement bank, right? So this is how I would be able to perform the rate of interest. So now I'm going to use this unimplemented methods. Okay, I will add the unimplemented methods. For example, say he has created only the savings account and he has a credit card and he is not fitting into this rate of interest, for the fixed account, and he doesn't have the rate of interest for loan as well. In that case, what I'm going to do, I'm not going to give the body to both of these methods, but instead I'm going to give the body to only these two methods. So which are the rate of interest for ROI for savings account is only 4%, and also the rate of interest for credit cards is 13%. So this is how I'm going to use. So ROI is 13%. So this is how I'm going to make use of the methods which is present, wherein I would be implementing the methods which I want. But this is important. So you will have to, though you don't give the implementation for this, just use this braces, opening and closing braces, which are considered as the body of it. Okay, and then you can start working with your class. So now if you create this Steve accounts, okay, Steve's bank account, for example, say S is equal to new Steve's bank account. Now you would be able to access all the object, all the attributes pertaining to its bank details, and also the methods which is pertaining pertaining to its bank details. For example, say s dot account number is present, so I'm going to provide an account number. So s dot customer name is present, right? Customer name is present, so I'm going to give his customer name. So s dot customer ID is there, so I'm going to provide him a customer ID. For example, 3 5 some name that I'm going to give, some ID, right? And then I'm going to provide the address to him. So along with which I'm going to utilize the methods like s dot rate of interest for the credit card, and it would also call s dot rate of interest for it what it is savings bank, right? So this is how, if I now execute this, okay, you would be able to see the rate of interest and also for the credit cards and also for the savings bank account. So this is known as your multiple inheritance in your Java, wherein you would be having two super classes. One is your class and the other one is your interface, okay, wherein your interface is also considered as a blueprint, right? So all blueprints are nothing but your classes itself. So this is nothing but your multiple inheritance using your interfaces. Okay, so clear on this, right? So what do you mean by abstraction? Abstraction means hiding the implementation and showing only the functionality. And then there are two ways of achieving abstraction. One is using your abstract classes and second one is using your interfaces. So using abstract classes, you can achieve 0 to 100% of abstraction, wherein your abstract classes can contain both abstract methods and also concrete methods, and in your interface it is always 100% abstraction. So this interface can have only abstract methods and it will not support your concrete methods, and your abstract class and interfaces both cannot be instantiated because both are incomplete. And in order to create a subclass, you will use extends keyword with respect to your abstract class, but you will use implements keyword with respect to your interface. So this is all about your abstraction. Clear? And now the third concept, or this third object oriented programming concept that we are going to deal with is nothing but your polymorphism. So let me create a package called as polymorphism, right? So I'll click on finish. So now I'm going to create a new class. Okay, so what do you mean by polymorphism? One name, poly means many, poly means many, morphe means forms, which means one name performing multiple tasks. When an object or when a method is capable of performing multiple tasks with the same name, then we call it as polymorphism. So when an object takes multiple forms based on the situation, then it is called as polymorphism. For example, say I am a human being. Okay, so I am a daughter to a father, I am a sister to a brother, I am a student in one point of my life, I become an employee in one point of my life, I get married to a person, so I become a wife, my husband, I become mother to my parents. So likewise, I take multiple forms in my life, right? So likewise, but my name is same. My name is always Hema. I will not change based on the role that I'm going to take, right? So likewise, even in your Java, there are certain members which will perform multiple actions, but their name remains the same. So based on the situation, based on the way they are to be accessed, they are going to take different forms. Okay, so there are two different types of polymorphism. One is your compile time polymorphism and second one is your runtime polymorphism. So what do you mean by compile time polymorphism? Your method overloading is known as your compile time polymorphism, which means at the compile time, your compiler will come to know that this name and the signature is matching with another method, right? So that is what we discussed when we were talking about overloading, right? So one name performing, or you can also call it as you can also take into consideration your constructor. So how we overload your constructor? One name but different signature, right? So but here we are not going to talk about in terms of your constructor, but we are going to talk about in terms of your method. So let me create that class method overloading. All right, here I take up this public static void main. Now I I'm going to talk about, for example, say a calculator application, right? I'm going to talk about a calculator application wherein I'm just taking the module addition. Okay, just think about a calculator, just relate the example that I'm giving. When you are performing this addition, is it always two integer numbers that we are going to add? Obviously not. Sometimes I might add two decimal numbers, sometimes I might add only two integer numbers, sometimes I might add one integer and one decimal, and the other way around is also possible. I'm going to add a decimal to an integer and I might add an integer to a decimal, right? So likewise, it can be interchanged, and I might add three numbers together wherein two are integer and one is decimal. So likewise, but what is the operation that I'm performing? The operation that I'm performing is addition itself, right? So that is what we are going to implement here. So how do I implement? I'm going to create a method called as addition, wherein first method that I'm going to create is taking only two parameters which are of integer type. So here what I'll be doing, I'm going to print a plus b, okay? And now the next requirement that I have is I want to add two decimal values. In that case, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use your double d1 comma double d2, right? Here I'm going to add what? I'm going to add your d1 plus d2, right? And now the next requirement here is I'm going to add one integer with one decimal value. So again the same method name, but only the signature is changing. So I say int a comma double d, right? So now I'm going to add this a plus d, right? So what if my requirement is the other way around? I want to add an integer to my double value. In that case, I'm going to add this in this way, double d comma int a, right? So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to use this and I'm going to print the d plus a. So if you now see this patterns, what actually we have done, we have used the same name, but we have performed different tasks using the same signature. Using the same name. So how are we able to do it? By changing the signature of the method, by just changing the number of argument it takes, the type of argument it takes, and also the sequence of argument it takes. So here it is taking two parameters, here also it is taking two parameters, here also it is taking two parameters, but here we are going to change the type. So we are changing it based on what? We are going to overload it based on the type of parameter it is taking. So again, if you come here, okay, it is also taking two variables and it is also taking int and double variables itself. But how are we overloading it? We are going to change the sequence of parameters it is taking. So here it is going to take int first and then double, but here it is going to take double first and next it takes the integer value. So this is known as your compile time polymorphism or method overloading, which means if you try to create the same method signature, maybe with a different argument list, okay, you might give a different name to it. Okay, even in that case, it will identify that there is a signature matching at the compile time itself. So that is the reason we are going to name it as compile time polymorphism or method overloading. All right, so this is the first one. What is the second one? The second one is your runtime polymorphism, which is also known as your method overriding. So what do you mean by method overriding? So let me show you what is method overriding. So here the prerequisite for you to simulate or for you to understand method overriding is, in your method overriding, inheritance is important, is a must. Okay, so I can say, for example, say I have created a class called as, what do I create? I'm going to create a class called as super, okay, which has a method called display. Okay, so here I'm going to write something. So here I say this is a super class method, right? So now I would take another class called sub, which extends super, okay, which extends super. So here I'm going to create another method called as display, which says this is a subclass method. Okay, so I'm going to mark this as this. Okay, so now as soon as you do this, can you see there is a small arrow mark which has been displayed here? So if you just mouse over, it is going to say this method overrides the method which is present in your superclass. Why is it showing like that? Because the signature is same, right? The signature is same. So what do you mean by overriding? Overriding is nothing but the subclass methods will hide the implementation of the superclass method. Okay, so hiding the implementation of your superclass method by your subclass is known as your overriding. When one method overrides the implementation of another method, we term it as overriding. So how do we override? So we can override the methods in where? In a subclass itself. So you cannot do the same in the same class. So this overriding is not achieved using your single class. So it always requires what? It always requires your inheritance. Okay, so now how do you come to know which method to access? So this will be decided based on the object that you are going to create. If you are going to create an object of type subclass, sub s is equal to new sub. So now according to our inheritance, okay, according to our inheritance, what will happen? Your sub method will contain, right, your sub method will contain the properties of both super method as well as sub method. Am I right? So both the superclass and also the subclass. Now how should your JVM understand which method to call if you say s.display? Okay, so this will be decided at the runtime based on the object that you have passed. Okay, so if you pass the subclass object, then it is going to call your subclass method, okay, wherein hiding the implementation of your superclass. So let me run this program. So here is how your overriding is achieved. Okay, so this is decided at the runtime and not at the compile time. Got it? So that is the reason your method overriding is termed as runtime polymorphism. So this is all about your polymorph. Very easy, very easy. All right, so this is about your polymorphism. Okay, and the last concept that we are going to understand in your object oriented programming system is nothing but your encapsulation. What do you mean by encapsulation? Binding up of the data and its behavior into a single entity called as class is known as encapsulation. So that is what we have been doing till now. So what we are going to do? We are going to keep all the data and all the methods which would act upon that data, and we will put it into an entity which is called as class, and that is what we are doing till now. It is your encapsulation. But there is another way implementation of your encapsulation concept. So your encapsulation supports data hiding. Okay, how do you achieve data hiding? Tell you. Okay, let me create a new package here. Create new package, and I'm going to mark it as encapsulation. Okay, click on finish. All right, so now let me create a class called as, what do I create? I'll just create a class called sample. Okay, let me create a class called sample. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, or let me remove this. I'm just going to create a class called sample, and here I'm going to hide the data. How do I hide the data? Data hiding is achieved using your access specifiers. So what do you mean by access specifiers? So these specifiers are a special keywords which are used in order to provide the access, or in order to describe the level of access that the level of access a variable can give. Okay, so there are 4 different access specifiers. One is your private, one is your public, one is your default, and your protected. So these are the 4 different access specifier levels that is present in your Java. All right, so when I say data hiding, it always talks about your private access specifier. So if you're creating something, for example, say a variable like int ATM pin. Okay, think you're creating a variable like this. Do you think your ATM pin should be accessible for all the classes that is present in our project? Obviously not. We are not going to call our friends and say, come, I'll give you my ATM pin, right? This is confidential. So which is a private asset, right? So in that case, I am going to create this variable as private, wherein I am going to hide this data from the outside world accessing this particular asset of mine. So but when you create a ATM, when you create a private variable, so this is not available outside this class. So in that case, for example, say I have provided the ATM pin as 1234. Think my ATM pin is 1234. Now, after a certain time, I want to change my ATM pin. I want to change it. So now, if it is not available outside the class, how do I change it? Or if I want to retrieve my ATM pin, how do I retrieve it outside the class? In that case, what we are going to do, in order to deal with your private members or the private variables, we go with a special methods called as getters and setters, which are always your public method, okay, which can only be accessed by an object of this type. So which means if you just create an object of this type, only then you can access this variables. So I say public void get pin, okay, wherein you will be able to retrieve this. Okay, let me print the ATM pin value. Okay, and there is another method which will help you to set pin. So we call it as the setter method. We say set pin. Okay, so this will help you to set the new pin to it. So this will always be parameterized. I just say new pin. Okay, so here you say ATM pin is equal to new pin. Okay, so this is what I am going to do. So using your private data members, private access specifiers, you're going to hide the data, and using the getters and setter methods, which are public methods, you're going to access the private members. So this is known as your encapsulation. So this is all about your Java concept that we are supposed to deal with. Okay, so what all did we discuss in terms of your Java? We discussed what is a class, we discussed what is an object, what are constructors, what are methods, along with which we also discussed 4 important features of your object-oriented programming language, which is your inheritance, encapsulation, and also polymorphism, and then your abstraction, right? So these are the 4 important concepts that we have discussed in our Java. So now this is all about your Java with this concept, but still you guys have to work a little on all this if you have to understand more. Okay, I have just given you a heads up on what Java is, so just try to work a little more on that so that you will get a good hands-on. All right, so now we are going to go back to our Selenium and start understanding what is a Selenium WebDriver, and we have also seen how Selenium has evolved, right? So we are going to understand few important concepts about your Selenium WebDriver, what are the disadvantages and advantages, and then we would see how to identify elements and how to close and open the browser. Okay, what is the difference between open the browser using your driver executables, what are the different driver executables that are there, and how do we deal with them. Okay, so this is what we are going to discuss. So now let me quickly create another project, new project. I say Java project, and then I just name it as Selenium project. Okay, so click on next and then click on finish. Okay, so here is what I've got. All right, let me remove this because it is already there. I'll just name it as Selenium. Okay, so let me create a new project, Java project, and I would just name it as Selenium. Alright, so click on next and click on finish. So here is what I've got. I've got a source folder, I've got a system library. So now how do we set up the path for this is what we are going to see. The important thing that you'll have to understand is configuring your Selenium with your Java project, right? So let me create a new folder. I would be creating a new folder here, yes, and I'm going to name it as jars. Okay, so I'll just name it as jars. We have already seen this, right? But still let me recollect it back. So this jars folder has to be created under your Selenium itself. So now what we are going to do, we are going to copy this Selenium standalone server, okay, and we are going to add it to our project. So here I am going to add it to my project, and I will add this to the driver executable, right? I'm sorry, I will add it to my build path. So as soon as I add it to my build path, I would be getting something called as referenced libraries, which means the external libraries that I would use in order to work with my Selenium. So here is what I've got. And the next one that I would be creating is a folder which would hold your driver executables. So I would name it as drivers, and I click on finish. So what do? I again go back. I would have downloaded the Chrome driver file .exe file. So let me copy that. Where are we downloading this from? We are going to download this from your seleniumhq.org, and for your driver executables you're going to go to third party bindings and you're going to download the chrome driver.exe file, and then for your jars you're going to download it from your downloads page, and your standalone server is what you're going to download. So once this is done, let me create a package under your source folder. Okay, then what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a name. Okay, I just say launch. This is going to be a package, I'm sorry. So edureka.basics. Okay, I'll click on finish, and then let me create a class, and I would name it as launch browser, right? So launch browser, right? So I've created a class. So now in order to work with your browsers, your Selenium standalone server has an interface called as WebDriver, which will give you the connectivity between your browser and your Selenium, right? So this WebDriver is an interface which has multiple abstract methods, so which will be implemented by your Chrome driver class. So this Chrome driver is an implementation class, and your WebDriver is an interface, and this Chrome driver would have given the implementation to all the methods that is present in your WebDriver, and it will be able to work with it, right? So now, what we are going to do is we are going to see how we can launch the browser using your Selenium, right? So I just use this public static WebDriver driver is equal to null. So this WebDriver, I'll have to import it from org OpenQA Selenium. So once this is done, how do I launch the browser? I'm going to say driver is equal to new Chrome driver. So this is nothing but your interface and your subclass concept. Your WebDriver is an interface. Okay, you will be able to find it here. So if it's I, then it is interface. If it is C, then it is a class, correct? So what this Chrome driver does, it has implemented this WebDriver, and it has given the implementation to all the methods that is present in this WebDriver, and this concept we call it as upcasting. So what do you mean by upcasting? So creating an object of type superclass, okay, using your subclass constructor, which means you will be now able to access all the objects of your Chrome driver and your WebDriver together. Okay, so that is what we are going to do. Now, this statement is all enough for us to launch a browser. So let us see what actually happens, but this is not going to run, but instead it is going to throw an exception. I'll tell you what that exception is, why we get that exception, and how to resolve the exception. As soon as I run this is an exception that we have got. So what is the exception? It is java.lang.illegal state exception. The path to the driver executable must be set by your system property, which is your webdriver.chrome.driver. So this is what we are going to capture. So how do we set the system property, and why did we get this illegal state exception? See, we have used your Selenium jar. We have added it to your build path. Your Chrome driver is an executable file which cannot be added to your build path, but you should establish a connection between your Selenium and your browser. So for that, you have to set the system property to a key and you have to provide the value, which is the location of this particular Chrome driver.exe file. So to do that, I'm going to use this system.setProperty method, which is going to take two arguments. One is the key and the second one is your value. So this key is basically what? This key is basically your WebDriver.Chrome.driver, which was provided for us by your message itself. That is the message of your exception. And then the value is the location of this driver executable file, right? So go to properties and then copy this location. So what we did, we just right clicked on Chrome driver.exe. We just went to the properties and we copied the location of that exe file. Now if you run this program, we are going to launch a browser automatically, right? So this is the concept of your launching browser using your driver executable. So the different driver executable that we have is what? We have it for Chrome driver, we have it for Mozilla Firefox driver, which is your Gecko driver, we have for your Internet Explorer driver, we have your HTML unit driver, which is a headless browser, and we also have it for Opera. So likewise, there are multiple drivers which I would be showing it to you now. So here if you go, right, so let me go to your seleniumhq.org. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to see what are the different driver executables that are available in our Selenium. So if you just navigate, here is your third-party driver bindings and plugins. So these are the driver executables that I have. So what are they? Mozilla Gecko driver, Google Chrome driver, Opera driver, you have your Microsoft Edge driver. It is in the implementation status. Okay, you have something called as Ghost driver, you have also something called as your HTML unit driver, and you have Safari driver, you also have your Windows Phone driver. So likewise, there are a lot of drivers which supports multiple browsers in your Selenium. So let us see we have seen how to go to this particular browser, right? We have seen how to go to the browser. So next we are going to see how to close this browser. So how do we close the browser? We are going to use your WebDriver methods in order to close your browser. So before that, we will navigate to a URL and check how it works. Okay, so to navigate to the URL, we are going to use this driver.get method, which would take the URL as an argument. Okay, www. I'm going to launch your facebook.com. all right, so this is how I navigate through the URL. So here I would launch the browser and then I would navigate to this URL. Okay, great. So I have navigated through the URL. Now what I want to do is I just want to close the browser that I have opened. In order to close this browser, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use a method called as driver.close. Okay, so this method is going to close the browser which you have opened through your Selenium. Alright, great. So it has launched the browser, it navigated through the URL, and it also closed the browser. So this is how we launch the browser, we navigate through a URL, and we are going to close it. Okay. So now what we have seen, we have launched the browser and we have navigated through the URL. Even before we close the browser, there are some operations that I would like to perform on my application. Am I right? So for that, we have to understand the application's behavior. So in order to do that, let us understand what a web application is. So what do you mean by a web application? Any application which is launched using a browser, which is opened using a browser, is known as a web application. What are your web application made of? Your web applications are made of web pages, right? So what does your web pages consist of? Your web pages consist of web elements. So this is the division. Web applications are comprised of web pages. So these web pages are made of your web elements. So in order to create these web elements, we use a language called HTML, and in order to give this make this responsive, we might have used multiple scripting languages like JavaScript, Angular JavaScript, or whatever, right? We are least bothered. But the important concept that we'll have to know, or the important language that we have to know, is your HTML, which is basically used in order to create your web pages, right? So these elements that you can see, your email, your phone number, the text boxes that are there, and the buttons that are here, the drop downs that you're here, and this buttons, right? So all these things are considered as web elements. So what are the different web elements that we would come across in a web page? We come across the text boxes, we come across check boxes, we come across your radio buttons, we see the links, we also see the buttons, okay? We come across your drop downs, we come across something called as frames, we also come across something called as alerts, right? So these are the different web elements that we come across in our web pages. Right? So now, how do we handle this? How do we identify these web elements and how do we handle them? So in order to do this, we have something called as locators in your Selenium, which will help you to identify all the web elements on your web pages. Alright, so we will understand what are the different types of locators we have, and we will also understand how to use these locators in order to identify the web elements. Okay, so let's get started. So what do you mean by locator? Locator are nothing but the address of the web elements on a web page. Okay, so now what we are going to do is we are going to create another class. Okay, before that we will understand how to inspect an element on a web application. Okay, let me launch this, let me open this, and now what I'm going to do, there are two ways of identifying an element on your Chrome browser. So you just right click and click on inspect. Okay, so it will directly take you to the developer tool. Okay, or you can also do this F12. If you just press this F12, even that takes you to the developer tool. Alright, so now how do you inspect the elements on a web application? Can you see there is a cursor symbol here? So this is known as the inspector, and what you have to do is, if you have to identify the address of this element, you have to use this inspect. So before that, can you see the lines of code which has been written in order to build this web page? Right, so this starts with your HTML tag, which will go down with your head, with your body, and this body will have multiple objects which have been multiple tags which have been created in order to create each and every web element. So you will be able to identify how the addresses are. So these are nothing but the address of a web element. So how do I inspect this email? Okay, so the first thing that you have to do is just click on this and then move your cursor to the element that you'll have to inspect. So there you would be able to see the tag and also the attributes of an element, of a web element. So how are these web elements made of? These web elements are made of the tag name, which will also contain the attribute and also the value corresponding to that attribute. So based on these tag name and the attributes, we are going to identify this element on a web page in 8 different ways using 8 different locators. So now we are going to deal with each and every locator one by one. So what is the first locator that we have? The first locator that we have is the locator by ID. So let me create a class, okay, and I would say locator by ID. Okay, so now this is going to be common. The first lines that we have taken, these 4 lines are going to be common. So let me do a copy paste work, right? The developer's job. So we have what we have done, we have just set the system property, and we have also launched the browser, and we have navigated to the URL, correct? So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to start inspecting the element one by one. So how do I inspect the element? We have a special method called as find element method in your WebDriver class, which will help you to identify the element uniquely on a web page. Okay, so let me use that. So now let me use that method. I'm going to identify this element. So here is what I've got. There is something called as tag name here, which is input. I have multiple values like the type, multiple attributes like type. I have class, I have name, I have ID. Can you see this? So this is the attribute that I'm going to use because your ID is always unique. Alright. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the value of that particular attribute, and I would use the method which is your driver.findElement by.id. So this by is an abstract class again which has multiple methods. So these methods are static methods, so which means you don't need an object to access them. Instead, you can use the class name to access those methods directly. Okay, so this has been identified. What is this? What have we identified? We have identified a web element, right? Web element email is equal to driver.findElement by.id of the value. Whatever value of ID is present, I'm going to give that. Now, what does this email store? This email will store the address of this particular web element. Alright, so which means the location of that web element is known. Now I can start operating that web element by sending the keys or performing some operations. So what is the operation that can be performed on a text box? We can type in the keys, right? In order to type the keys, we have a special method in your web element interface, which is sendKeys method, which will help you to send the characters. So here I'm going to pass the key called as Edureka. So now if I run this, what it is going to do? It is going to launch the browser, it will navigate through the URL, and it will enter the username, enter the value that I have given in the username field, right? Only if the address is correct. Can you see this? It has now entered the value here. Okay, so this is one way of identifying an element using your locator called as ID. The second way of identifying an element is by the name. So the second locator we have is locator name, right? So I call this class as locator by name, and let me copy those 4 lines. I'll close this. I am going to copy these lines. Okay, so here is what I'm going to do. Just paste it. Okay, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to identify another element using the name attribute. So how do we identify it based on the name attribute? I say web element password is equal to, what do? I say driver.findElement by.name. Okay, so first we'll have to check whether there is a name attribute in your password or not. So let me inspect it. So here I go. So there is a type, there is a class, yes, there is a name. So this is the name that I'm going to capture. Okay, so this is what I'm going to perform. I'm going to capture this address, and using this web element, I'm going to send the keys for that password field as well. So here I would type in password.sendKeys. I would say Edureka. Alright, so this is what I'm going to type in. So let me run this and check what actually happened. Okay, so now it has launched the browser, it is navigating through the URL, and it would enter the password in the password field because we have identified it uniquely, right? So this is how you identify it based on the name. So the next one that you're going to use, the third locator that you're going to use is the class name, right? So the third locator is nothing but your class name, locator by class name. All right, so now let me again copy those 4 lines. Okay, and I would paste it here. Alright, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to check whether the class name is unique or not. So now you'll have to bother about the uniqueness of a web element. Okay, so when do you identify a web element? When you are going to perform some action. So when you are identifying that web element, you have to make sure that that web element is always unique to perform any operation. So if there are multiple web element which is which shares the same address, then do you think that you will be able to perform some operation on the destinated web element? Obviously not, because see, for example, it is very similar. So you're going to your friend's house and she has given you a door number. So you go to that place, you go to that area. Will you be able to identify that house if there are multiple houses with the same number? So for example, say there is a door number 25 and next to it also there is a door number 25. Again, there are multiple door numbers with 25 itself. Will you be able to identify which is your friend's house? Obviously not, right? So that is why you should always identify the web element uniquely in order to perform some operation on that particular web element itself. Right? So in that case, always go with your ID or your name, because these attributes will always have its uniqueness. But your class name, what happens with your class name is, your class name is something which would be created. So this class name can be related to a group of people studying in a class. Okay. So for example, that I'm a student and you guys are also student who who are studying in your science department. Okay. So we all belong to a similar class, and what is that classroom called as? That classroom is called as the science classroom. Correct? Is it called with some individual person's name or individual attribute name? Obviously not. If you have to refer to me there, then you will have to come to the class name and then identify me uniquely. Correct? So which means your class name is always not unique if you are trying to identify a particular web element. So the same thing what happens in your web application is, for example, these are multiple text boxes. Correct? So to give some look and feel to it, to give some color to it, what we are going to do is, we are not going to assign a color for each and every individual text box, but we are going to group them into a class, and we are going to provide the CSS, that is the style, for the entire class. So that is the reason always your class name might not be unique. Okay, so if you want, I can show you that. So here is your class. Can you see this? In class is equal to input text. Okay, so here it is, which is 58 mg 5dba 2ph hyphen. Okay, so now you have another one here. So can you see this? Input text 58 mg 5dba 2ph hyphen, right? So all these particular variables or all these particular web elements belong to a same class. So that is the reason your class name is always not unique, but you can still go with a class name if it's unique. For example, we'll see if there is a class name here. So it has a data test ID and it has a type. So that's a submit. So it doesn't have a class. So let me check if this has a class name and if it's unique. Okay. So this has a class name. Okay, let me try to check whether it is unique or not. Alright, so it is button. So don't worry about what I'm writing here. I'm just checking the uniqueness. So you will also be able to do that later. Class is equal to perfect. So this is unique. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pick this up. Okay, I'm going to pick this up and I would be clicking on this create account button using your class name. Okay, so when I click, so on an application, if you just try to click on this create account, it is going to throw all the error. Okay, so that is what we are going to check, whether it has clicked or not. Okay, that is how we conclude. So how do we identify the element based on the class name? You say driver dot find element by dot class name, and you're going to pass the value of the class name here. Alright, so what is this web element? This web element is your create account element, right? Create account element. So always make sure that you're going to give relevant names, okay, which describes what actually you're looking for. Okay, so just don't give web element C is equal to. So when you say C, you will not know what it's C, right? or if you say web element L is equal to, what is L? So I don't know. So if you say a variable, or if you create a web element variable, so make sure that you know what variable it is and what element you are capturing. Okay, so what can you perform? What is the operation that can performed on a create account? You can perform the click operation. So this click operation is again another method which is present in your web element interface, which helps you to click on the button. All right, so now I'm going to run this code, so you will be able to see the click simulation that will be done. Okay, so now it has launched the browser, it is navigating through the URL, and then it would click. Okay, there is an error. Okay, here is the error. So which means it says invalid selector exception, which is not unique. So this is a compound class name. Okay, so it is not unique. Your class name is not unique. So when your class, when any web element is sharing the same address, then it is going to throw a invalid selector exception. So that is the reason it is showing this exception, which means since the class name is not unique, it is not going to allow you to find out this element. Let me check. Okay, control F. Okay, though it shows 1, it is not helping us to identify it. I think because it is a compound name which has been used in the same page, so that is the reason it is not allowing to work with us. Okay, so this is what happens when you have the compound name and when it is not unique. Okay, so now the next locator that we use in order to identify any web element is your link text. Okay, so locator by link text. Okay, so what do you mean by link text? So this is nothing but the locator which will help you to handle your links. Okay, especially your links. So now what we are going to do, we are going to identify the link on a web page, and then we are going to see how to handle it. Okay, so now I would go to your Facebook again. So what is a link? This forgotten account is a link, right? So in order to capture this, let us see if it's a link or not. Okay, how are your links created? Your links are created using your a tag, right? So this is your tag which will be used in order to create your link, and your link text is nothing but the text which is being placed between this closing angular braces and opening angular braces. All right, so you'll have to copy this link text and you will have to identify this element. Okay, so how do we do that? I say driver dot find element by dot link text, and I'm going to pass this link text here. Okay, so this web element is nothing but the forgotten account web element. So I say forgot account, right? So is equal to driver dot find element by dot link text, and I provided the link text. Now what I'll do, I would click on this forgot account, right? Dot click. Okay, so when you use this and if you run this, okay, if you run this code, then it is going to click on your forgotten account link and it is going to open the respective page, right? That is why we create your links, right? So it has another page which will be linked to. So once you click on that, it is going to open that page. Can you see this? It has now opened your page, right? So this is the locator which will help you to work with your link. And the next locator that we have is your partial link text. For example, say you have a link, okay, locator by partial link text, right? So for example, say you have your locators, okay, you have your links wherein the link is too big. Okay, for example, if I go here, can you see this? Why do I need to provide my date of birth? If you click on this, it is going to show you this value, correct? So now I don't want to provide the complete, what to say, text of it, but instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the partial value and I would be able to capture it. Okay, I'm just going to use this date of birth, okay, and then I'm going to work with it. Okay, so here I'll have to copy this first, or for the same forgotten account also you can do it. So we'll see how to work with it. Okay, here let me copy this public static WebDriver. All right. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to identify that web element, date of birth link is equal to, right? So let me import this web element first. I'm going to use this driver dot find element by dot partial link text, and I would be adding this link text here. So let me copy this date of birth alone. Okay. So this date of birth, and then I would place here. So what is the operation that I would perform? I would perform the click operation, right? So here is what I'm going to do. So let me click on that. Okay, it has now launched the browser. Now it is going to click on that particular link, right? So this is how you identify a link using the partial value, okay? And the next locator that we have is your locator by tag name, right? So the tag name is the locator. Tag name. Again, this is going to create a lot of problems if you're identifying an element uniquely, okay? So this tag name is not going to identify the element uniquely, but instead you will be able to use it for multiple values. For example, say you have multiple links on a web page, you have multiple text boxes on a web page. So how do we create multiple text boxes? We use your input tag, right? So this is an input tag, this is an input tag, and if you're trying to identify web element, okay, uniquely using a tag name, it is not possible, correct? It is not possible. In that case, what you're going to do is you're going to identify that particular tag, element, okay, multiple elements using your tag name. So how do we go with capturing multiple elements is we are going to use a special method in your driver interface, yes, which is your find elements method, which is going to return the list of web elements. So I'll show you how to work with it. So here I say driver dot find elements by dot tag name. Okay, so here I'm going to give the tag name as A. So what am I going to do? I'm going to capture the number of links that is present in a web page. So what is this going to return? This is going to return a list of web elements. So now I'm going to add the list of web element here. So I'll name it as all links is equal to. Okay, so let me import this list and let me import this web element as well, right? So let me use this import statement in order to import it. And what am I going to do? Once I capture all the links, I am going to just print the size of or print the number of links that is present on a web page. So for that, I am going to use your size method, which is present in your list interface. Okay, so this list is an interface in your Java, which is present in your java.util package. So this has a special method called as size, which is used to identify the size of the list. All right, so if you do this, what it is going to do, it will go to your web page, okay, that is your facebook.com, and it will capture all the links that is present in a web page, and it will give you the number of links that is present in a web page. So that is what it is going to print. Can you see here? There are 56 links which is present on this web page alone. Okay, so that is how it is going to work. All right, so now this is another locator, and we have two more locators. One is your XPath and the other one is your CSS. So what do you mean by XPath? A very important locator that you are going to use throughout your career is mostly your XPath. Okay, so why do we use your XPath? So what is this XPath? This XPath is the location of an web element through the DOM structure. So what do you mean by DOM? DOM is nothing but the document object module. It is also called as the XML path of the web element. For example, say you have this facebook.com, right? So you have this facebook.com which has the structure of, what it is doing. Oh, it is loading. Great. Perfect. Okay. Let me directly go to facebook.com. All right, great. So now when you inspect this, Okay, so whatever you're seeing here is known as the document structure of a web application. Okay, so the structures has multiple hierarchies, which means under your head tag you should have your scripts, you should have your metadata, you should also have your title provided. Okay, so anything as such will be provided in your head, and all the elements that is going to be created should be present under your body tag. So likewise it has its own structure. Alright, so here you will be able to see all the objects that has been created. So within one tag there is multiple tags which have been created. So this hierarchy is known as your XPath or your document object modeling. Okay, so we are going to discuss about your XPath in depth in the next class, but here now I'm going to show you what are the different types of XPath that we have, and I'll just tell it in a high level. I'll give a heads up. So there are two different types of XPath. One is your absolute XPath and the second one is your relative XPath. So your absolute XPath always starts with the root element, which is your HTML, and will go down to the respective element considering all the open tags. Okay, so that is /HTML /body /div or whatever. So it keeps on going until and unless it reaches the element that you are looking for, which is going to be a huge address. Okay, and it always starts with a single /. Okay, but there's something also called as a relative XPath. So your absolute XPath is not at all recommended to be used in your real time. So what you're going to do, you're going to go with your relative XPath. So your relative XPath is nothing but the XPath which starts from the current node. Okay, so it always considers the current node. Okay, which means if you're dealing with this particular element, it starts with that particular element itself. So it always starts with 2 /. So I'm going to show you how to write the XPath. Okay, so let me create a new class, locator by XPath. Okay, so let me use this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to let me copy all this. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, let me close all this. All right, okay. All right, so now what I'll do is I'm going to show you how to write XPath. Okay, writing XPath. So how do we write an XPath? I told you your XPath always starts with what? It will always starts with your 2 /. Okay, in that case, this is how you're going to write your XPath. Okay, I'll show you this. 2 / followed by the tag name, and then you give attribute. Okay, when you're using your attribute, you should use your @ attribute is equal to value in single quotes and close your braces. So there are multiple ways of writing an XPath. This is just one way that I'm showing it to you for today's class. Okay, in the next class we are going to deal in depth about your XPath. Okay, so now let me identify an element using your XPath. So let me identify this particular element using an XPath, and I would be using any attribute. Okay, here I'm going to use your first name, okay, the name, and I would be writing your XPath, or I can use your ID also. Okay, whatever you are comfortable with. Now let me show you how to write an XPath on your browsers. So on this developer tool, you have to just press Ctrl F. You will be getting this particular bar, okay, search bar, where you can write your XPath. Okay, so now you have to start writing like this, /. Okay, or let me identify this using your /. Let me take this ID or name, whichever you want. Okay, how do I write it? I have to take the tag name first. The tag name here is input. Okay, and the attribute that I've considered is ID, so I give this @ID is equal to, what is the value? The value that I'm going to give is email, and I'm going to close the square braces. So as soon as you write your XPath, this is what it is going to do. It is going to highlight that web element, and it would say whether it is unique or not. Can you see this? It says 1 of 1, so which means this is unique. So that is how you're going to identify the XPath. So what is this web element? Web element username or email is equal to driver dot find element by dot XPath, and you're going to provide this XPath, and then you start acting upon that particular web element. Okay, so here I say email dot what it is, send keys, right? If you send keys, it would go and write that particular value. Okay, so here is what you're going to do. So it is now launching the browser. It would navigate through the URL and it would type in the value. So this is what your XPath does. So likewise, on the other hand, you can also write your CSS. So the next locator we have is your CSS selector, locator by CSS selector. So this CSS selector is nothing but the CSS value of your web element, but it also acts very much similar like your XPath. The only difference is it is not going to take your forward slashes, okay, and it is not going to use your when you have your attribute, okay, you're not going to give your @ symbol. Okay, that is the difference, and there are other differences as well which we'll be discussing when we deal with it in depth. Okay, so here I'm going to copy this complete set and now I would paste it here. So let me remove this. Now what I'm going to do for the same web element email is equal to driver dot find element by dot CSS selector, and I'm going to pass this CSS selector value. So all I do is input ID is equal to what is the value, email. So this is how you're going to give. Okay, you're not going to provide your forward slash, and you can start acting upon your web element now. Email dot send keys. So what is the keys that I'm going to send? I'm going to send Edureka, right? So this is what I'm going to do. So just run this and you will be able to achieve your goal. So this is how you're going to work with multiple multiple locators on your web applications in order to identify an element and perform some operation on that. Okay, so can you see this? It has now entered the value. So what are the 8 locators that we have discussed? We have discussed ID. The 8 locators are ID, class name, and link text, partial link text, tag name, XPath, and CSS selector. So these are the 8 locators which will help you to identify multiple elements on your web page. Okay, so the next important concept that we are going to deal with is another method of your WebDriver which is import. Now we have seen something called as driver.close. So what does this driver.close do? This driver.close is used to close the browser that you have opened, right? So but there is another method. Okay, there is another method. I say driver.close here. So there is another important method which is your driver.quit. Okay, why is this used? This is also used to close your browser. Then what is the difference between these two is, so this driver.close method is used to close the browser which holds the address, right? Which means when, for example, when you just go to this facebook.com, okay, and what you're going to do, think you're going to click on this term. Okay, what it has done, it has opened another web page in a new window, right? But now what I want to do is I want to close the browser. I want to close all the browsers that I have opened. So if you say driver.close, your driver.close method would close only the parent window. So this comes here as a parent and child relationship. So this is going to be a parent window which was launched for the very first time. So whatever browsers opens after you perform some operation, then that is known as your child browsers. So in order to close all the browsers that you have opened through your Selenium, you're going to use your quit method. Okay, so I'll show you the difference between your close and your quit. So let me inspect your terms and let me click on your term. Okay, so let me just go to that. So here I would go to this terms. So let me take this terms and identify this. What I've done, I have come to this facebook.com, right? I've just come to this facebook.com and now I'm going to click on this. So web element terms is equal to driver dot find element by dot link text, and I'm going to pass this link text here, and I would click on this terms dot click. Right, so now it is imported. Now what we are going to do, I'm just going to say driver.close, so you would be able to see what your driver.close method do. Okay, so now it is launching your browser. It would navigate through the URL, and then it is going to click on that terms, and then it is going to close your browser. So which is the browser that has been closed? The parent browser which it opened for the very first time is the one that it is going to close. Now my requirement is not to close the parent browser, but I want to close all the browsers that I have opened through your Selenium. In that case, what we are going to do, we are going to use your quit method, which will close all the browsers which has been opened using your Selenium. So we'll see what it does. So now it is going to launch the browser, navigate through the URL, click on the terms, and then it is closed. I know you guys were not able to see what actually is happening. So for that, I'm going to make this thread to sleep for 5 seconds or 3 seconds until that terms page gets opened. Okay, then we are going to work with it. Okay, so then we are going to see how your quit works. Okay, I'm just making it sleep, I'm just making it wait. Okay, so now let me run. So it has now launched the browser, navigate to the URL, and it would click on that terms page. It has launched. Now it is going to close everything. So this is how we are going to work with your browsers and handle the multiple browsers that has come up. Okay, so let us check what we have dealt today. Okay, so this is what our objectives was. We understood the Java basics, we understood the basics of your Selenium WebDriver, we opened the browser. So today we have opened your Chrome browser. So further classes, when we start dealing with it, we are going to work with your Firefox browser as well, so you don't have to worry about it. We have seen how to launch a browser, we have listed all the web elements, we have also listed about the browser drivers, what are the different drivers that we have, and we have also seen what is the difference between your browser.close and your driver.quit, the difference between these two. So here are your definitions of whatever we have discussed in the last class, and also your today's class. So if you want, you can just go through these slides, okay, and then understand. If you guys have any doubts, you can feel free to reach out to us. Okay, so we are always here to help you. So this is the summary of what we have discussed. So we have seen the basics of your Selenium WebDriver. We know how to find and list the web elements, and then we saw the different browser drivers and various element locators and your Selenium commands, right? So now if you have any questions, please feel free to drop us an email or contact our customer support, who will always there to help you. Okay, and then as I always request, this is your feedback session, so please do take up your feedbacks, be it a complaint, a compliment, or a suggestion, or an idea you have. We are open for it. Okay, please do take up feedback, which will help us to serve you better. So we work on improving ourselves on each and every day. Okay, so with that, we are going to wind up your session, and I want you guys to practice whatever we have done in today's class, and also do a little R&D on the Java basics, so that you will have a good control over your Java programming. All right, and then come back to the next class so that you'll have a good continuity. Okay, thank you so much for being with us. Until we meet for the next time, have a good day. Bye bye.